Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello. Let us get right down to business and share screen. Hopefully this will work the first time. Let us see.
Hi, Darren.
Hey, Debbie, how are you? Hey, Steve.
Hey, Darren.
Miss you guys. Hey, how are you?
Hey.
Miss
All right,
you
I'm going
guys.
to try this again. The screen sharing thing sometimes doesn't work. So we're going to try this again. Give me a thumbs up if you can see this page. It says Meditation, Judaism, and Self-Mastery.
Yep.
I see it.
Okay,
thumbs up.
very good. Thank you very much.
Hey,
All right. So let's get down to business. This is really good stuff. We're starting on a chapter of the Jewish view of enlightenment as portrayed by Rabbi Kaplan. It is mega interesting. And because he's such a genius and the way he looks at things is very much from the eagle's point of view, giving you this whole panorama. We're gonna kind of try to break it down into understandable pieces because it's very rich and very inspiring. So we're going to spend some time with this and bring in various sources, which I think will also be eye-opening. So we're going to make progress, maybe even finish the first part of this from him. And I'm just going to put everybody on mute. So hold on a second. And if people have questions, then you'll be able to ask at the end. So hold on. All right, so hold on. Okay. So at the end, when you want to say something, then you'll unmute yourself. Now I'm going to go back to share screen. All right, it didn't come up again. Hold on. Give me another thumbs up that you can see the same document. All right, good, thank you. Okay, and as we always do, we're going to wrap up this class with a solution to solving a problem people have with meditation. Today it'll be stupor or dullness. Just as a review, some of the questions that are in the process of being addressed include, can we wrestle or argue with or persuade God? What do the Keruvim at the Garden of Eden represent? And what is this whole deal about God, Koneh HaKol, purchasing and repurchasing, owning everything? What about astrology, and can the Messiah be a woman? Just as a reminder, sometimes people ask me about Jewish practice. I'm the wrong guy to ask. You got to get yourself an advisor on how to live. I'm just conveying Rabbi Kaplan's teachings as best I understand them. I don't even research questions about how people should practice Judaism. Okay. So as a short review, let's talk about what Rabbi Kaplan said last week. He made the following points. He referenced the Kabbalah. In this particular teaching about this form of meditation, the meditation which leads to enlightenment, he said the goal is enlightenment. And what is the Hebrew word for this? What is the term the Bible uses? It's Ruacha Kodesh. That, he says, is our name for enlightenment. And we've come across this many times. You can even just read the Chumash and read Rashi, and you'll see references to Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, and here, Rabbi Kaplan says it refers to what the Buddhists and what your today's spiritual seekers call enlightenment. And it's a fundamental, essential practice in our people, but it takes a lot of work, as they all do. Okay. He says that Ruacha Kodesh, reaching that level, becoming enlightened, means you have clarity of understanding, you have an enhanced perception, you have an awareness of the spiritual, and you have a complete change of personality. And if you think how hard it is to change yourself, then you can realize what kind of effort has to go into becoming enlightened. How many people do you know that have had a complete transformation of their personality? Okay. He says that in higher, truer states, Ruach HaKodesh provides clear, unequivocal perception, and you can actually receive information that is not otherwise available. So I think that's implying, that there's levels of Ruach HaKodesh. And at the highest levels, you are like an antenna receiving information from outside of you. Okay. He does make mention, as we discussed last week, of 3 levels of the soul, so to speak: Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. Nefesh we're associating with, as we said last week, as we know in the Chumash, with blood, with water, which we'll get into. Ruach, he associates with what he says is spirit or wind, and Neshama he associates with breath. And as I said last week, it's hard to understand when presented that way, because you have to ask, what exactly is the difference between breath and wind? So I mentioned that I'm going to use the essay about biblical metaphysics written by Ethan Dorshav, a great biblical scholar, to get a little bit more clear on the use of those terms. So the Ruach part of this, we're talking about Ruach HaKodesh, has to do with some kind of wind. Okay. And he also associates the word spirit with this. And what we said last week, to make this a little bit more understandable, is the fact that in the Torah, there's a reference to the word ruach, to the spirit, and it seems to imply pretty strong emotions. Like there's a ruach, there's a spirit of envy, there's a spirit of joy. There's different strong emotions related to ruach, and I mentioned the answer I got to a question from a rabbi in Fair Lawn a number of years ago when I asked, why during the 3 weeks in the summer, the 3 weeks of mourning, are we allowed to listen to a baseball game on the radio but not attend a baseball game? And the answer was Ruach HaRov, meaning that if you go to a stadium, you get swept up in the emotion of it. People get excited because there's a home run, and you get swept away, you get carried away. And the mental framework that you're supposed to have during that time of being more serious and solemn, because of what these days commemorate, you lose that. But you don't really lose that when you're just sitting by yourself or with somebody else in your living room listening to the radio, so to speak, listening to a ball game that's remotely. There's no other people there full of emotion to sweep you away. That's the difference. So that's Ruach HaRov. So there's a Ruach associated with a certain spirit that could either be good or bad. Okay, and so we're going to have to learn a little bit more about emotions to see how emotions equate to spirit and how they fit into this whole idea of a shared spirit. Okay. He also mentions, he also mentions that in this model he's creating of the soul, that there's levels, and there's a nephesh level that has 10 levels. And once you advance through the lowest level, you go to the next level, which is the Ruach level. And what that's saying to us is that, contrary to the common use of the word, he's basically saying that we don't have a soul. It's not like we have a soul like we have an arm. He's saying we're in a soul. We're functioning in a soul. And our movement through the soul depends on what? It depends on, in this case, when we're talking about Ruach Kodesh, it depends on what kind of person we become. And he said that there are 10 steps leading to Ruach Kodesh, and he quotes the Talmud. The Talmud talks about this: study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, abstinence, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. Okay. So as we mentioned, this is mind-boggling in a way, because what he's basically saying is that how you live and the midot, the characteristics you dedicate yourself to developing within you, can elevate your consciousness to the point where you can advance through this lower level of the soul and go to the next level. So your lifestyle is what is helping you advance spiritually. And since we're since we're saying that this achieving Ruach HaKodesh is through a meditation, because his whole presentation is about types of meditation, here's an example of the way you live being a meditation. And your meditation is to develop these midot, these characteristics: the diligence, the cleanliness, purity, piety, humility, on and on and on. So we've entered a whole new ballgame now when we're talking about meditation, because now, instead of just saying, okay, well, now I'm cooking, or now I'm shopping, and then I'm going to meditate as a distinct activity, we're basically saying that to achieve Ruach HaKodesh, you're meditating 24/7, because it's how you live that gets you the benefit of this meditation. In this case, the benefit is enlightenment, or as we say, Ruach HaKodesh. And so then he says, the individual is ready to, once he dedicates himself to developing this way, he lives a life of piety, him or her, dedicating himself to God far beyond the call of law. And this leads to humility, the negation of the ego. So at some other point, we're going to have to talk about this, but he's throwing us a hint that enables us to relate to what modern day spiritual seekers are talking about. They're talking about destruction of the ego or transcendence of the ego in order to get enlightened. We're saying, okay, he's calling it negation of the ego, which is achieved through humility. So I'm not going to get involved in this stuff about, well, are you actually destroying it? What does it mean to negate? Is it like bitul, like we say bitul aro? We say like something is nullified from a kosher point of view. If you have if you have a big stew in your pot, you know, like chicken stew, and a drop of milk goes into it, the amount of fleishic matter is so much more than the little drop of milk. It just gets bitul, it gets nullified, you know. So you can still eat it, the chicken soup, because that little bit of milchik is outnumbered so much, to such a great extent. So is that what he's talking about? So he doesn't get into it here. At some point, we'll see if we can get into that, because it seems to be essential to go to the next level, out of the nefesh level to the ruach level. Okay, and that's where we're going to pick up today. The very next level is that of Ruacha Kodesh. Okay. Okay. It is interesting to note, now where are we? We are right here, right here. It is interesting to note that one of the most popular devotional texts, Path of the Just, Mesilat Yesharim, by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, is nothing more than a commentary in these 10 levels. That's a mind blower. I've gone through this. It's really potent. And he says that in essence, that entire book is a commentary on the levels of on how to live so that you can move through the levels of the nefesh and get into the arena of the ruach. This text is studied by individuals in all walks of life, but few realize that it was originally conceived as a handbook for initiates who sought to enter the highest realms of enlightenment. So isn't that so? That's a good example of what we've been talking about as far as how we lost the spiritual tradition. The Ramchal, who lived in the 1700s, he lived from 1707 to 1747. He was only 40 years. And he came out with this masterwork of spiritual living. So he had a busy 40 years. And he wrote this book as a manual on getting enlightened, how to get enlightened, or as we would say, to achieve Ruach HaKodesh. But when was the last time you went to shiur and had to talk with somebody, and they said, and they knew that this book was that? They usually say, oh, it's a book on how to live, it's a book on good behavior, it's a book on how to become a chassid in terms of a dedicated person, because he uses that word chassid a lot. But they wouldn't understand the original purpose of it being a handbook on how to get enlightened. That shows you the extent to which spiritual searching and spiritual paths have been pushed to the wayside in our communities. So, but he said, what Rabbi Kaplan says, but with a background in Kabbalah, however, it immediately becomes evident that the 10 levels discussed in this book correspond directly to the 10 levels of the spherotes of this going through their soul. What the author is actually doing then is categorizing all the devotional teachings in the Bible, Talmud, and Midrash according to these 10 levels. Okay. Although the Kabbalists provide many detailed meditations aimed at the attainment of Ruach HaKodesh, it is universally recognized that this level can also be attained by intense devotion and prayer. For this reason, before describing the system of meditation used to attain such enlightenment, Rabbi Chaim Vital states, this level can also be attained through sanctification and Torah study on the part of the individual without resorting to any other practice. So that's kind of interesting, because just one page ago, Rabbi Kaplan was talking about living in such a way that you developed a person, you change your personality, you upgrade your personality so that you have certain midot, certain characteristics: diligence, cleanliness, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin. That's the way, and we said that this form of meditation is how you live. It's a lifestyle. It's a 24/7 occupation. And on the other hand, Rabbi Kaplan quotes Reb Chaim Vital says, well, you can also get the same thing by intense devotion and prayer. It doesn't mean that you live like a total Dumbo or a total jerk. But he says that if you focused on those activities, you can also achieve Ruacha Kodesh. Obviously, in order for the devotion, intense devotion and prayer and study, when he says devotion, he's talking about study and prayer. That study and prayer has to be pretty intense in order to match what your lifestyle could do in terms of making you a certain kind of person. Okay. And then he goes on to say, this idea is not confined to the Kabbalists. It is actually based on an ancient medrash, which states, when a person reads the Torah, prophets, and writings, the Tanakh, and spends his days in the academy, he immediately becomes worthy of Ruach HaKodesh. An even older source dating from the 2nd century states, if an individual accepts upon himself even one commandment with perfect faith, he becomes worthy of Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. So obviously it's not clear cut. I mean, obviously there's a few different ways to do it. There's not one path. And some of this you have to take with a grain of salt, in the sense that it can't be as easy as say, well, if I go to Minyan 3 times a day, if I go to mikveh once a month, if I go to a shiur every Monday night, I should have it. You can't treat it that way. We're talking about a quality of effort, which is probably deeper than most people give anything. But the good stuff ain't easy. Okay. And remember, he says, worthy of Ruach HaKodesh, because Rabbi Kaplan has said before that you'll make yourself worthy of it. You make yourself eligible. It's not a shoo-in, like gift from God, blessing from God type of thing. I'm not sure how that works. But regardless of the means you use, whether it's through your lifestyle, whether it's through study and prayer, whether it's through embracing one mitzvah with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might type of thing, whatever the means is, then you make yourself eligible for the end result, which is Ruach HaKodesh, which is enlightenment, but it's not a guarantee. You make yourself worthy of it. Okay. So I know I can hear people thinking, and some people are thinking this, to say, wait a minute. Okay. So we're talking about meditation, and obviously Rabbi Kaplan is explaining to us that the Jewish definition of meditation is very broad and includes lots of stuff. You can do one mitzvah as a meditation, and you could do prayer and study as a meditation. You can live as a meditation, completely devoting yourself to it. But as we've described, being detached from it, so that you grow in the process. Okay. And then if you do this, you'll be eligible but not guaranteed to get the end result, which is Ruach Kodesh. Okay. So now let's ask a question. So now, up to this point, we've been talking about isolated acts of meditation, such as sitting meditation or standing meditation or even moving meditation, we mentioned. Okay. And we've said that what happens there is you're supposed to be able to gain more self-mastery over what goes on in your mind and let the contents of your mind flow in front of you and not get swept away with it. And we're also talking about how it develops increased concentration, better focus. Okay. So now the question is, if these forms of meditation make you worthy but not guaranteed to get Ruach HaKodesh from, let's say, God, does the same principle apply when you do these more simple forms of meditation, sitting, standing, moving? I mean, in other words, is your increased focus, is your increased concentration, is your ability to distance yourself from the contents of your mind and not get carried away, are they also gifts from God? Are you making yourself worthy and eligible but not guaranteed? It seems to me the answer would be yes. Because it would be inconsistent to say, well, if you do this type of meditation that we do at the end of this class every day, you're guaranteed to get better focus. It's a hard thing to say. And it would be awkward to say, well, that's guaranteed, but it's not guaranteed to do the more advanced stuff. I don't think it would work that way. That's my initial impression. I think your attitude has to be, in all cases, no matter whether you're doing simple 15-minute sitting meditation per day, or you're dedicating your whole life to the meditation of developing yourself, in both cases, it's not a shoo-in, you're making yourself worthy. I think that's how we have to start taking a look at this. Which, if we go back to what Rabbi Kaplan was saying a month or two ago, is consistent with what he was saying, because he's basically saying, when we're talking about the Amidah, and your frame of reference in the Amidah, using that as a meditation should be, all right, God, here I am, reporting for duty. What do you want? Let's work on this. God has the final say in that. So to be consistent, God has the final say as to whether you increase your focus or not. God has the final say as to whether you have Ruacha Kodesh or not. So that idea, to be consistent with what Rabbi Kaplan was saying, has to be that everything is a matter of making yourself worthy, and it's not a guarantee. That's tough stuff. All right, and here's a really big thing. Another important teaching regarding the enlightenment of Ruacha Kodesh is its universality. It is not a respecter of person or place, as the prophet Eliyahu taught his disciples, and he's quoting Eliyahu. I call heaven and earth to bear witness that any person, Jew or Gentile, man or woman, free man or slave, if his deeds are worthy, then Ruach HaKodesh will descend upon him. It is significant to note that this teaching is quoted in a number of Kabbalistic texts dealing with meditation. The ultimate enlightenment of all humanity is also evident from the prophecy of Yoel, who said in God's name, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. So this is for everybody, Jewish or not Jewish, man, woman, slaves, whatever, whatever we look at as being slaves. This is a universal thing that everybody can achieve. That's really something. Okay. So he wraps it up with quoting both the Ramchal and the Rambam on this. Let's see what the Rambam has to say first. An individual having all the necessary qualifications can delve into the mysteries, the pardes, advancing in these deep, subtle concepts and gaining a firm understanding and perception of them. At the same time, he must also sanctify himself and separate himself from the ways of the masses who grope in the darkness of the times. He must achieve constant diligence in not even thinking of non-essentials or considering the current vanities and intrigues. So the Rambam is automatically taking a heat bodhidut perspective in an interesting way. We talked about heat bodhidut as separating yourself from your thoughts and also physically separating yourself so that you don't get distracted. He's also saying that there's heat bodhidut in terms of separating yourself from the craziness of the masses. People walking around with 3 vaccines, 6 masks, and 20 feet from people, this kind of stuff. He says you got to separate yourself from the mindset of the crazy masses. Okay. Such a person must work on himself until his mind is constantly clear and directed on high. He must bind his intellect to the throne of glory, striving to comprehend the purity and holiness of the transcendental. He must furthermore contemplate on the wisdom of God in each thing, understanding its true significance, whether it be the highest spiritual entity or the lowliest thing on earth. The grace of God as seen in a bug. That's my comment. The individual who does this immediately becomes worthy of Ruacha Kodesh. When he attains this spirit, his soul becomes bound up on the level of the angels, and he becomes a completely different person. He can now understand things with a knowledge completely different than anything that he ever experienced previously. The level that he has attained is far above that of other men who can merely use their intellect. This is the meaning of what the prophet Samuel told King Saul. The Spirit of God shall descend upon you, you shall prophesy with them, and you shall be transformed into a different man. That's from the first book of Samuel. So once again, the Rambam is saying what Rabbi Kaplan said earlier, maybe he got it from the Rambam, that your whole experience and perception of the world is different, is greater once you achieve this. And you're a different person. Okay. And then he finishes up by giving a little bit more detail on what the Ramchal says, and this is what he says. Ramchal says, God ordained that man should naturally be able to teach himself, understand, and reason with his intellect, and thus gain knowledge for his observation of things and their properties. So we are taught, we are born to think. On the basis of this knowledge, man is able to infer and deduce things that are not immediately apparent, and he can thus gain a more complete understanding of things. This is the natural process of human reason. So we talked, an example of this is who? We talked about Abraham Avinu, how, and we looked at the Mishnah Torah. We looked at how it was, we looked at the guide for the perplexed, the Mishnah Torah. And we looked about how he described this process of Abraham, how the Rambam described the process of Abraham going through this thought process, and like, all these people are bowing to the sun and the moon and the stars, like, it doesn't make any sense. And he used critical thinking to deduce, no, there's somebody behind all this. That's what we're talking about. Besides this, however, God also decreed that there exists another much higher means of gaining knowledge. This is what we call bestowed enlightenment, beyond what we're born to do. Bestowed enlightenment consists of an influence granted by God through various means, especially designated for this purpose. When such influence enters a person's mind, certain information becomes fixed in his intellect. He perceives this information clearly without any doubt or error, understanding it completely with all its causes and effects, as well as its place in the general scheme. This enlightenment is called Ruach HaKodesh. In this manner, one can gain knowledge of things otherwise accessible to human reasons, but in a much clearer manner. So you're using more than your normal God-given faculties. At the same time, he can gain information that could not otherwise be gained through mere logic. This includes such things as information concerning future events and hidden mysteries. Don't know about that. We'll see if we can get more information on that. This experience can take place on many different levels. These involve the intensity of the influence, the time for which it is granted, and the manner through which it reaches the individual, and the nature of what is revealed and communicated in this fashion. In every case, however, the influence comes in such a manner that the individual is clearly aware of it. So if you've achieved this level of perception where you know that what you're seeing and perceiving is not coming out of you. It's not a product of your own intellect deducing what's going on here. It's being given to you. It is also possible that such influence be extended to a person's mind so that he is able to clearly perceive a given concept without being aware of this influence. So you're getting something and you don't know you were given it. In such a case, it is experienced like any other idea that spontaneously arises in one's mind. In a broader sense, this is also called Ruach HaKodesh, or hidden influence, in the words of the sages, even though it is actually a much lower level. Lower level because you don't know it's being given to you. Maybe you think it's coming from you. To the person worth of it, however, true Ruach HaKodesh is a manifest experience where one is highly aware of its influence. So, as we said before, there seems to be these levels, And the higher level is when you know it's not you, it's coming from external to you. The lower level is you think it's you. Okay, that seems to be still okay. But there is yet another level that is much higher than Ruacha Kodesh. This is the level of true prophecy. This is a degree of inspiration in which the individual reaches a level where he literally binds himself to God in such a way that he actually feels this attachment. So the Navi, the prophet, in this idea is not just receiving a message from God. It's like, in a way, God's in the room talking to him. Let's put it that way. He then clearly realizes that the one to whom he is bound is God. This is sensed with complete clarity, with an awareness that leaves no room for any doubt whatsoever. The individual is as certain of it as he would be if it were a physical object observed with his physical senses, like somebody in the room. The main concept of true prophecy, then, is that a living human being achieves such an attachment and bond with God. This in itself is an extremely high state of perfection. Besides this, however, it is also often accompanied by certain information and enlightenment. Through prophecy, one can gain knowledge of many lofty truths among God's hidden mysteries. These things are perceived very clearly, just as all knowledge gained through bestowed enlightenment. Prophecy, however, comes with much greater intensity than Ruach HaKodesh. He must know what he's talking about. But what's important to understand is that we've been talking this whole time about Ruach HaKodesh being given to you because you make yourself worthy. How do you make yourself worthy? Through the kind of life you live, to attain all these personality characteristics and change your personality for the better, or for this intense study and prayer, or through this complete and total devotion to even one mitzvah. But it seems like any one of these is the path to not just enlightenment, but prophecy being higher. But you notice that none of this says that prophets are born that way, prophets belong to a certain class. It's like they earned this stuff. They made themselves worthy of prophecy. And so from that point of view, you can see the high level of esteem that the prophet should be held because of how they lived and what they dedicated their lives to. They earned that. They earned the opportunity to be sitting in the room with God, so to speak, and have God talk to them, so to speak, and say, this is what you got to know. They earned it. Okay. Let's see what time it is. All right. So we will finish up with Bante and solving the problem of stupor or dullness in meditation. We have already discussed the sinking mind phenomenon. So you kind of like feel, and you kind of just like you don't fall asleep, but you kind of just get lethargic. But there is a special route to that state you should watch out for. Mental dullness can result as an unwanted byproduct of deepening concentration. As your relaxation deepens, muscles loosen and nerve transmissions change. This produces a very calm and light feeling in the body. You feel very still and somewhat divorced from the body. I think somebody once mentioned, or a couple of people have mentioned that. That's common. I mean, it's not the same thing as having an out-of-body experience, but you feel detached. That's part of the bargain. This is a very pleasant state, and at first your concentration is quite good, nicely centered on the breath. As it continues, however, the pleasant feelings intensify, and they distract your attention from the breath. You start to really enjoy this state, and your mindfulness goes way down. Your attention winds up scattered, drifting listlessly through vague clouds of bliss. Somebody actually described that a month or two ago. And according to here, they lost it. They lost their meditation. Your attention winds up scattered. The result is a very unmindful state, sort of an ecstatic stupor. The cure, of course, is mindfulness. Mindfully observe these phenomena and they will dissipate. Again, his cure for everything, which is right, is like you lose your mindfulness, then become mindful. It's like, oh, you got distracted? Get back to your focal point. All of a sudden, you're mindful again. He does that with everything, and it's right. When blissful feelings arise, accept them. There is no need to avoid them, but don't get wrapped up in them. They are physical feelings, so treat them as such. Observe feelings as feelings. Observe dullness as dullness. Watch them rise and watch them pass. Don't get involved. He's going to say this with every solution. Let it run. You will have problems with meditation. Everybody does. You can treat them as terrible torments or as challenges to be overcome. If you regard them as burdens, your suffering will only increase. If you regard them as opportunities to learn and to grow, your spiritual prospects are unlimited. So says Bhante. And we will continue with a lot of his solutions to problems, as he has a bunch of other chapters on this. So we're going to keep using him for the final segment of our classes. So now we will stop sharing and we will turn the recorder off.